The proposed Sing Sing Historic Prison Museum, located on the Hudson River in Ossining, New York.
Many people may wonder what Sing Sing Prison has to do with democracy in America. The evolution of the penal system in America, however, is closely linked to the evolution of democracy. It was such an important element of the new democracy that Tocqueville spent 9 days at Sing Sing when he came in 1831 from France to see the new democracy and study the U.S. prison system. The Prison Museum project was an outgrowth of the Village 1994 Main Street and Waterfront Revitalization Plan. The museum concept was shaped by community members, local and county leaders. Consultants were hired to prepare an interim concept plan in 2000 and a marketing study was prepared in 2001. The estimated costs and benefits have been updated for this presentation. This aerial photo from 2000 shows the relationship between Sing Sing and the village of Ossining. The prison is outlined in blue. A county wastewater treatment facility is outlined in pink. The town of Ossining's Engle Park is outlined in green. The prison is bisected by the Metro-North Railroad. A commuter ferry dock is located just a short walk north of Sing Sing. The original power plant of Sing Sing is located outside of the prison wall. This would be the entry point for the museum. The 1825 cell block is located within the prison walls just west of Metro-North Railroad tracks. The roof burned during the 1980s. A secure connection is proposed to take visitors over the prisoner wall and into the new structure that would be located inside the 1825 cell block. Visitors will not be able to view the existing prison population from the proposed museum. This is a view from Sparta Park at the southern end of Ossining. Sing Sing is in the distance, and you can see how the train travels through the middle of the prison. Ossining's beautiful views of the Hudson River are unparalleled. The Ossining Boat Club is located just north of Sing Sing. The ferry dock in Croton Point Park can be seen in the distance. Looking towards Sing Sing from the north, one can see the old power plant where the entry to the museum will be. The sidewalk you see is a part of Westchester County's Riverwalk. The town of Ossining's Engle Park is located right next to Sing Sing. This park includes an original guard tower that has a plaque recognizing Alexis de Tocqueville's visit. The historic Ossining train station is a short walk from Sing Sing through the park and commuter parking areas. The village of Ossining is located in existing regions created to promote the cultural and natural resources of the Hudson River Valley. The National Heritage Area is a federally designated area, and the Hudson River Valley Greenway is a state-designated area. The Ossining Heritage Area is located within the village and is a state-designated area. The theme of the Ossining Heritage Area is the Old Croton Aqueduct and Sing Sing Prison. The museum for the Ossining Heritage Area is located in the Joseph Caputo Community Center in Ossining. The village is also a member of the Historic River Towns of Westchester, which is currently seeking designation as a New York State Scenic Byway. The village is accessible by multiple means of transportation via Route 9, the Westchester County Beeline bus service, Metro-North Rail, and commuter ferry. Parking for this facility will be located adjacent to the facility, and additional parking may be possible in the center of the village, with a trolley or some other transportation service getting visitors from the parking to the prison museum. Almost 25 people live within a 2.5-hour drive of Ossining. It is feasible to make a day trip to Ossining from Philadelphia or Albany to see the proposed museum. The estimated economic benefits have been updated to reflect current year dollars. The consultant estimates that the museum will cost between $8.5 and $12.5 million. The construction expenses will be over $10 million, with over $2 million of which would be wages. The marketing study projects that there will be an average annual attendance of 152,000 visitors. The operating expenses would be over $1.5 million, of which $1 million would be spent in Westchester County. The operation costs would be supported by museum entrance fees. The visitor spending on items such as accommodations, food and beverage, transportation, retail, recreation is estimated to be almost $7 million in Westchester County and over $7 million in New York outside of Westchester. The effective visitor spending is projected to be over $22 million in expenditures, almost $7 million in earnings, and provide for 257 jobs in New York State, 113 of which would be in Westchester County. The museum is projected to yield estimated combined yearly tax revenue of almost $1 million for all jurisdictions. The village will likely experience other benefits such as improved streetscape between the train station and the proposed museum, improved regional ferry connections, and improved connections between the center village and riverfront. There is also the potential for increased tax base and enhanced downtown and waterfront vitality, but probably not as crowded as the 19th century image in the background depicts unless a festival is happening. Playland is the largest tourist attraction in Westchester County. Sing Sing would complement the existing large tourist attractions in the region. Dia Beacon is the newest large-scale tourist attraction in the area. The marketing prepared for Dia Beacon projected an annual attendance of only 50 to 60,000 visitors. The annual attendance the first year it opened reached 140,000, and Metro North Railroad noted a 20% increase in ridership on its Hudson River line since Dia Beacon opened.
New York State owns the property and controls the destiny of the project. Westchester County is prepared to be a major partner in this museum. The National Trust for Historic Preservation has reviewed the marketing proposal for the museum and expressed that the proposal is good and possibly conservative in its conclusions. The village and town of Ossining are longtime supporters of the project, and the Ossining Heritage Area Committee is a steering committee for this museum. The museum is supported by the Historic River Towns of Westchester, the Hudson River Valley Greenway, and Historic Hudson Valley. The museum will trace the history of Sing Sing prison since 1825 and place Sing Sing in the wider context of development of the penitentiary system and history of punishment. The museum will illustrate the prison reform movements that have shaped the modern prison and American culture in general. The proposed museum is divided into 5 sections: the genesis of the American prison, up the river, the cell block from 1825 to 1943, the death house, which visitors will have the option to bypass, and Sing Sing today. The first exhibit of the museum will be located in the former prison powerhouse building, which was constructed by the prisoners during the 1930s. This will be the entry point for visitors. Sing Sing will be introduced with exhibits and films. The history of punishment in colonial and post-revolutionary America up to 1820 will be interpreted. The museum will interpret Sing Sing as it is today and Sing Sing's longevity. The visitor will be introduced to the evolution of the American prison and how it is inseparable from Sing Sing's history. Visitors will be informed that they are entering a medium security area of an operational prison. The next exhibit will interpret the prehistory of the site. Visitors will be educated on the geological formation of marble beds, Native American occupation of the site, and the early history of the villages of Sparta and Sing Sing. The Native Americans were part of the Muscum tribe named Sing Sing. That phrase, when translated, means stone upon stone and refers to the extensive beds of limestone found in the southern part of the village. On April 2, 1813, the village of Sing Sing became the first incorporated village in Westchester County to be state chartered. Visitors will learn why the prison site was selected was for the mining of Sing Sing marble. Labor was considered as a method of retribution and rehabilitation. Also, New York State saw the mining as a means to fulfill the goal of economic self-sufficiency and pay for the new institution. Prisoners also were involved with other industries of making barrels, boots, shoes, hats, brushes, mattresses, and molasses hogsheads for rum dealers. Their involvement with these industries later became an issue with labor unions. Labor unions called for the boycott of items made in Sing Sing, which negatively impacted businesses located in the village, prompting the changing of the name of the village of Sing Sing to Ossining. Sing Sing marble was used to construct the Calvary Baptist Church, Highland Court Apartments, and the Printex building. Sing Sing marble and the prison labor was used to construct the wall on Secor Road, the road connects the village center to the waterfront. Sing Sing has received visitors since its inception. The popularity and name recognition is tied to the fact that Sing Sing was New York City's prison. The prison has welcomed a wide range of visitors such as Alexis de Tocqueville, Babe Ruth, Charlie Chaplin, Woody Allen, and Joan Baez. In the 19th century, there were hidden observation corridors for visitors to peer at the prisoners. Prisoner observation areas are absolutely not included in the proposed Sing Sing Historic Prison Museum. There are many postcards available from this time period due to the popularity of the site. And actually, the electric chair postcard was actually one of the most popular postcards during this time period. Most early prisoners were from New York City, America, if not the world's preeminent city. The phrase, "up the river," was coined because prisoners were transported up the Hudson River to Sing Sing. The New York Times and other papers reported events at Sing Sing as if it was part of the local beat, and reporters had easy access to the prison. In colonial times, confinement was used only for paupers, orphans, debtors, the debilitated, the insane, and to hold suspected wrongdoers pending trial. The guilty criminals were punished by shaming the offender into acceptable behavior through branding, the stocks, the pillory, cropping ears, or carting them through the streets, whipping, or eliminating them through exile or death. When Americans won independence, they viewed vengeful retribution as a brutal remnant of the monarchical tyranny. With the new democracy, there was a search for punishment appropriate to the new republic, rational, certain, humane. There was a shift of punishment from the body to the mind. This movement was influenced by the Enlightenment thinkers such as Cesare Beccaria, Jerry Bentham, and John Howard. The American experiments with penology were of Quaker influence. Thomas Ed, a Quaker reformist, was a prison warden at Newgate, New York's first prison. There was early success in rehabilitating criminals into productive citizens. The prison had congregate rooms, and the prisoners were made productive with work and provided with education. But the prison became overcrowded, and riots and fire ensued, closing the prison. The failure was attributed to congregate rooms. In the first section of the museum, there will be a theater and changing exhibit space. The visitor orientation film shown here will introduce visitors to the model American Penitentiary, harsh punishments, and the chair. The theater will be the setting to tell the story of Hollywood's relationship with Sing Sing. Sing Sing was the location of the first gangster film by a major film studio, Alias Jimmy Valentine, filmed in 1915 on location at Sing Sing. It was also a popular movie backdrop in the 1930s and 40s, especially by Yonkers-born James Cagney, who starred in such classic movies as Angels with Dirty Faces and Each Dawn I Die. The prison has also been in more recent films such as Analyze This, and have been featured in TV episodes of Law and Order. In the classic Breakfast at Tiffany's, Audrey Hepburn was the first to wear Givenchy's little black dress when she visited Sally Tomato at Sing Sing, setting a new trend in fashion that endures today. The second main exhibit section will be located in a new secure walkway designed to move visitors between the powerhouse and the original 1825 prison cell block. The design of the hallway is proposed to evoke a feeling of a journey from freedom to confinement by the hallway physically getting smaller as you approach the 1825 cell block. There will be no views to current prison population, and it will be climate controlled. The Up the River exhibit will interpret how visitors and inmates used sloops, steamboats, boats, and trains to come to Sing Sing. The display will illustrate the process of becoming an inmate and the intake procedures for convicts in the 19th century. This included removing manacles, haircuts, instructions on behavior. Visitors will have the opportunity to try on period manacles and feel how heavy they were. The third exhibit will be located within the walls of the 1825 cell block. The exhibitry will span the active life of the cell block as was constructed by convicts and inhabited by them. The exhibit space will be new construction. The new exhibit space will be located at the northern end of the 1825 cell block, which is almost the length of 3 football fields. The key in the lower left corner of the screen indicates the relationship between the proposed museum and existing cell block. Visitors will have access to 2 stories in the exhibit space in the 1825 cell block. Visitors will be able to step out of the building onto a viewing platform to get a closer look at the historic 1825 cell block. The original cell block stones will seem to speak as historic images of prisoners and prisoner personnel are projected onto the walls. Sing Sing was home to many famous and infamous prisoners, such as bank robber Willie Sutton, who asked why he robbed the bank and replied, "Because that's where the money is," and James Larkin, the famous Irish Union leader. The construction reform exhibit in the original cell block will provide visitors with the facts of the cell block. 102,000 inmates were housed here from 1825 to 1943. The inmates were isolated from the world and each other. The exhibit will also explain how the building served the goals of retribution and rehabilitation. Reform theories existed that addressed the question of what divides criminal from the law-abider. There are also statistics gathered from prisoners aiding to distinguish one from the other. This image shown here on the slide is of the inside of the 1825 cell block when it was 100 years old in 1925. The exhibit will illustrate the creation and evolution of the Auburn system and the Pennsylvania system. During the time of Jacksonian America, architecture was thought to play an important component in moral science. Reform was thought possible through design of prisons, almshouses, orphanages, and asylums. The individual characteristics of silent congregate model, the Auburn system, and the separate system, the Pennsylvania, will be interpreted. The photo shown is of Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. The 2 systems had common traits of separation, obedience, and labor. A rivalry existed between Auburn and Pennsylvania systems as to which was the model penitentiary. The Pennsylvania system was defined as a solitary regime. The prisoners were in solitary confinement but did work. New Yorkers felt that the Pennsylvania system of isolation of prisoners from arrival to release was too inhumane, unnatural, and cruel. The Auburn system was a silent congregate where the prisoners did spend time working together in complete silence. The silence was used to keep order. Sing Sing was the first penitentiary to fully embody the principles and design of the Auburn system. From the early days, Sing Sing was a destination of penologists and the curious public that came in great numbers. The use of dark cells was a form of punishment. The isolation cell will be interpreted in the elevator that goes between the 2 floors. Visitors can opt to take the stairs between levels. The early years of Sing Sing represent a second generation of reform with an emphasis on architecture, order, discipline, and work for profit rather than develop habits of industry. The first warden was Elam Lins, who transferred from Auburn. The early years were brutal at Sing Sing. The nature of labor was hard, and the inmates worked under constant observation, fear, and punishment. The ominous and austere artistic images of Sing Sing during this time period portray the desolate conditions and attitudes towards reform. During this time, Ossining native warden Charles Wiltz operated underneath a catocracy, the whipping by the cat o' nine tails. The cat o' nine tails was a particularly nasty whip with 9 lines with knots on them. The poor treatment of the mentally ill and African Americans will also be interpreted at this time period. Beyond the harsh treatment, the prison was cold and the food was poor and insufficient to survive on, especially with the work details that they did day in and day out. The prison uniforms had groupings of stripes on their uniforms that indicated the number of times a prisoner had been sentenced to Sing Sing. The multiple repeat offenders' groupings of stripes would eventually merge, and these inmates were nicknamed zebras and were considered the worst inmates. Visitors will have the opportunity to enter an 1830 cell and get a sense of what it was like to be confined in the House of Fear. The only light that came into the cell was through the wrought iron door. Between the late 1830s and late 1840s, the Whigs took political control. Horace Greeley from Newcastle was Westchester's most notable Whig, and he was active with the reforms at Sing Sing. There was an investigation and removal of Wiltz and a shift from deterrence and repression to faith and reformability. Warden David Seymour served at Sing Sing and provided humane treatment. Crime was considered not individual responsibility but rooted in family and city. The change in attitude of the prison can be interpreted through the artwork. During this period of enlightenment, the prison is almost pictured in a romantic setting. The reform brought about changes such as the creation of a library, Sunday school choir, and temperance pledges. There was the restoration of family and community ties. Family visits for inmates were allowed. The mentally ill patients were moved and sent to Utica Asylum upstate, and floggings were abolished by law.
Mount Pleasant Female Prison, the first U.S. women's prison, was opened in 1839 at Sing Sing. The prison was Greek temple outside and was an Auburn plan cum nursery inside. Major problems erupted with the prison after 5 years, and there was the institution of controversial reform measures based on phrenology by prison matron Elizabeth Farnham. The radical methods of Mrs. Farnham included reading books like Oliver Twist and teaching the women to read and write. Some reformers thought her actions were too liberal, and the reformers were turned out with the new elections. The museum at Sing Sing will be the opportunity to shed light on famous women in history. Elizabeth Farnham was most famous throughout her life for being the first prison matron at Sing Sing, even though she was also an active feminist, phrenologist, author, lecturer, spiritualist, philanthropist, with newspapers covering her every appearance. Mrs. Farnham seemed to be everywhere during the mid-1800s. The Prisoner's Friend, a magazine, revealed how deaf-mute Laura Bridgman, her student at the Massachusetts Institute for the Blind, learned to communicate in a technique famously practiced years afterwards with Helen Keller. Mrs. Farnham ran the circuit with such notable women as Susan B. Anthony, who invited Mrs. Farnham to address the 1859 Women's Rights Convention on the superiority of women. She also served as matron of California's first insane asylum, and in 1863 served as a volunteer nurse with Dorothea Dix in Gettysburg, where she died at the age of 49 from tuberculosis. By 1848, the general public became disinterested in penal reform, and there was a reduction in financial support. The attitudes towards the penal system swung from one of reformation of the prisoners to punishment. There was an increase in physical punishment, the shower bath, dark cells, the yoke, bucking. There was a demise in the prison's discipline system. Understaffing, low pay, high staff turnover, overcrowding, and double bunking were prevalent. Corruption abounded, and negative attitudes towards immigrants were high. During this time period, inmate violence increased with riots and escape attempts. Historians attribute this to idleness and deficits. Use of tobacco, opium, and other contraband was abundant. Prison argot had developed, which had coined such famous phrases as "up the river." The artwork from this time period reflects the harsh depression conditions at Sing Sing. The museum exhibit will recreate an 1860s cell design. Each cell was designed for one man, but often housed two. The cells were 7 feet long by 3 feet wide and 6 feet 7 inches high, little more than a cubbyhole for a human being. There were 800 cells stacked on top of each other, 4 cells high in a building that was 476 feet long. As shown in the photo from the National Archives, the bed had to be tilted up for a person to be able to sit in their chair. During the 1860s, the Lincoln funeral train stopped at Sing Sing to replenish water for the steam engine. Prison guards were allowed to board the train to pay their respects to the fallen president. The attitudes towards the prison changed by the end of the 19th century, and the prison was a medical and therapeutic model of reform. It was thought that criminals could be changed by curing them. Crimes were ascribed to social and psychological causes, and the prison was open to social workers, psychologists, and psychiatrists. There was a classification of prisoners and the creation of institutions with different security for the first time. Warden Thomas Mott Osborne, pictured here in the 1825 cell block, started the Mutual Welfare League, whose motto was, "Do good, make good." He started an anti-institutional approach with a more varied day, elimination of the striped uniform, and elimination of lockstep. He introduced outdoor and indoor recreation, the inmates' judicial court, store, and classes. Warden Lewis Law was the longest-serving warden at Sing Sing and probably the most famous warden of the country. He was the first warden to work his way up the system from the entry level of prison guard. Initially, Laws was in favor of the death penalty, but became an opponent when he served as warden at Sing Sing. Despite his opposition, he oversaw hundreds of executions by the electric chair at Sing Sing. Warden Laws used every form of media, old and new, to get his opinions regarding prison reformation and punishment across. He was a master of media. He wrote books, talked on radio programs, and he was active with Hollywood films. Warden Laws was also outspoken against anti-Semitism, racism, and Nazism. He worked on the modernization of Sing Sing and construction of the new cell blocks. The prisoners moved out of the old cell block in 1943. An important part to Warden Law's success can be credited to his wife, Catherine, who also was a reformer. She saw the men less as prisoners and more as individuals. She regularly entered Sing Sing, encouraged the prisoners, ran errands for them, and spent time listening to them. To the prisoners, she was a saint. On October of 1937, Catherine was killed in a car accident on Bear Mountain Bridge Road. Upon hearing of her death, the prisoners petitioned the warden to allow them to attend her wake. There were not enough guards to escort the prisoners to where she lay in state, but he granted their request. The south gate of Sing Sing swung slowly open, and 1,000 men, unguarded. They were felons, lifers, murderers, thieves, men convicted of almost every crime conceivable, marched 3/4 of a mile from the prison gate to pay their respects to Catherine, and then they reassembled and returned to their cells. Not one tried to escape. If he had, the others may have killed him on the spot, because to try to escape would have been seen as disrespectful to Catherine Laws, the saint of Sing Sing. Sports became an important element to daily life at Sing Sing. The New York Yankees played annually during the 1920s, and Babe Ruth was rumored to hit his longest home run here. Some of the prisoners went on to play professional baseball and football. Residents of Westchester used to come and watch them play. The teams were about the level of a good college team and played local teams. The Sing Sing team, however, always had the home team advantage, as they were never allowed to play away games. Some elements of reform were inspired by those sentenced at Sing Sing. Charles Chapin, editor of The World, a New York City paper, was a powerful man. He lived the high life, anticipating a large inheritance from a relative. When the relative passed, he received nothing, and it was despondent due to financial ruin. He schemed a murder-suicide to kill his wife and then himself. He murdered his wife and then was able to follow through with the second part. He eventually turned himself in, and he was sentenced to Sing Sing. At Sing Sing, he elevated the prison newspaper to become a popular local newspaper. The paper was cut due to budget cuts. He then asked if his job at Sing Sing could be to take care of the grounds that were a barren dust bowl. He started with grass seed and eventually transformed the grounds of Sing Sing through landscaping. Inmates learned how to plant grass, flowers, and trees. Birds were suddenly known to visit Sing Sing where they had never visited before. Chapin's accomplishment, which included an aviary, appeared in newspapers across the country. The exhibit will have a recreated 1930 cell, which was much larger than those of the 1825 cell block. During this time, the old cell block was still used on a rotating basis due to high prison population. The final exhibit in the old cell block will interpret the process of being discharged from Sing Sing. The exhibit will include the process and what they were given upon release. The walkway back to the powerhouse will be separated from the walkway that the visitors took to get to the cell block. This section will have site markers, interpreted landmarks, and buildings visible from this vantage point. The walkway enclosure will be designed to feel less confining as you walk through it, opening up to give a sense of being freed from the prison. On-site security features will also be interpreted. The proposed exhibit on the death house and the electric chair will be located in the powerhouse. Visitors will have the option to bypass this exhibit space. The electric chair was originally in a building adjacent to the 1825 cell block. A new building was constructed, and the exhibit will interpret the design of the death house. The phrase, "last mile," comes from the walk death row inmates took to the execution. The walk took less than 5 minutes. Other death house area included Old Sparky and the dance hall. Visitors will have the opportunity to visit by video simulation with a condemned prisoner and hear about the daily routine in the death house. They will also hear about the routine of the last week at St. The invention of electrocution was attributed to an accidental electrocution by a Buffalo dentist. Government was looking for a more humane way to execute criminals committed to death, and electrocution was considered as more humane than hanging. The exhibit will also interpret the public attitudes towards progress and new technologies at the end of the 19th century, the development of electricity, electrotherapy, and other uses and experiments with electrocution. A controversy existed between George Westinghouse and Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison, who invented the light bulb and phonograph, also invented the electric chair. He created the electric chair in an attempt to demonstrate that George Westinghouse's alternating current, AC, which could be increased to a higher voltage for efficient transmission over long distances, was more dangerous than Edison's direct current. Edison toured the United States using his rival's AC power to electrocute cats, dogs, horses, and elephants. Edison called the process of electrocution Westinghousing. The first execution was of Arthur Kremler at Auburn State Prison in upstate New York. There was opposition before and after Kremler's execution. Eventually, the electric chair was permanently installed at Sing Sing, and all electrocutions in New York State occurred at Sing Sing after 1914. The exhibit will include stories of individual executed prisoners and the statistics of all the condemned. The extensive press coverage and selections from Warden Law's Life and Death in Sing Sing about different prisoners will be highlighted. The execution was witnessed by 12 reputable citizens, 3 court officials, 2 doctors, a clergyman, 7 keepers, the executioner, and the warden. The warden issued invitations on execution week. Relatives were not allowed to witness the execution. For many years, women were not allowed to be witnesses. The exhibit will have reproductions of press accounts and other published recollections of witnesses. The famous reporter Nellie Bly was the first woman to witness an execution. After witnessing the execution, Nellie Bly became a staunch opponent to the electric chair until her death in 1922. The executioner initially wore disguises and took other precautions to remain anonymous. The exhibit will provide statistics on the executioner and the recollections. The job turnover rate for executioners was quite high, except for that of Robert G. Elliott, who served from 1926 to 1939. When he left, Warden Laws received over 700 applications for the vacant executioner position. The electric chair was removed in 1963 and the death penalty was abolished in New York State. The exhibit will chronicle the reinstatement of the death penalty in New York and the methods used for capital punishment. The exhibit will account the continued use of the electric chair elsewhere and the subsequent uses of the death house building. The last exhibit will illustrate the history of Sing Sing from 1943 to 2000. The exhibit will also provide an overview of contemporary issues such as weightlifting. The exhibit will also allow visitors to listen to current Sing Sing oral histories. One story might be that of Anthony Papa, who in 1985 was a family man who owned a failing radio repair business in the Bronx. He was offered $500 to deliver an envelope for an acquaintance, unaware of the cocaine inside or the sting operation that awaited. Though it was his first criminal offense, the Rockefeller drug laws dictated a mandatory 15-year-to-life prison term. His wife left him. He couldn't see his daughter. Papa was consumed by regret and thoughts of suicide until he discovered painting, a pursuit that sustained him and gradually inspired him to fight for justice. When his self-portrait was exhibited at the Whitney Museum in 1994, a burst of public sympathy caught the attention of Governor Pataki, who pardoned Papa just 3 years short of the full sentence. The gift shop will be located near the entrance and exit. These items shown here are part of the continuous market of Sing Sing related items available on eBay. The proposed annual revenue is expected to be almost $300,000. A significant element of the gift shop will probably be the numerous books that are written about Sing Sing and the penal system. These titles are just some of the new releases from the last few years. Rich Weideman, the spokesman for the Golden Gate National Recreation Area that manages Alcatraz, has stated that Alcatraz is successful due to the high name recognition of Alcatraz. Sing Sing has a very high worldwide name recognition, and Weideman thought it could be an asset that Sing Sing is still active. Many may not realize, but there are over 50 prison museums worldwide and over 80 prison museums and related facilities, with 49 in the United States, 15 in the United Kingdom, 7 in Europe. There are also 21 elsewhere, to include Japan, China, Cuba, Argentina, Australia, Canada, Israel, Barbados, Kenya, South Korea, and Russia. In San Francisco, London, and Dublin, historic prisons are the single largest attractions. There are museums at active prisons, such as the Correctional Services at Canada, which, like Sing Sing, is a maximum security prison. San Quentin, California, and Louisiana State Penitentiary Museum, more famously known as Angola, also have museums. Their exhibits include an original electric chair, original inmate record books dating from 1889, weapons used by guards, and historic artifacts. Alcatraz, a federal prison, closed in 1963 and was only open for 30 years. Sing Sing has been open for over 180 years. Alcatraz is located on an island, the Rock, and is accessible only by boat. Alcatraz boasts an annual attendance of 1.4 million people. Reservations must be in advance for this extremely popular attraction. Eastern State operated from 1836 to 1971 and was the model of the Pennsylvania system, the Auburn system's rival. Eastern State opened in 1994 as a museum, is continually expanding its season, now running from April 1st to November 30th. Eastern State Penitentiary is a closed prison, and the facility programming is much different than what would be proposed for the Sing Sing Prison Museum. Ossining and Sing Sing are located in one of the most beautiful rivers in the world. Agencies such as the Hudson River Valley Greenway and the National Heritage in recent years have promoted the region as a tourist destination. There will be new marketing opportunities up the river. The New York State Canal System has seen a surge in economic growth to the tune of almost $400 million per year by promoting towns, museums, restaurants, and parks along the Erie Canal. Creating a similar tourist industry is possible in the Hudson River, with opportunities to enhance municipal waterfront access. New York State is blessed with a linked system of navigable waters extending up the Hudson River to Lake Champlain and into Canada. The Erie Canal links the state from east to west. Lake Ontario connects to the city of Ontario and up the St. Lawrence River to Montreal. There are 13 million registered boats in the United States, and New York ranks 7th in the country with more than 528,000 registered boats. There are over 70 million boaters nationwide. Westchester County is known for many, many golf courses. However, the number of golfers, 13 million, pales in comparison to the number of boaters. The New York Waterway is also a migratory route of water-based snowbirds, those people that spend their summers on the cool waters of Lake Ontario or even any of the Great Lakes, and then they winter down in the warm waters of the South. There are many destinations located along the Hudson River in Westchester County alone. There are county parks such as George's Island, Croton Point Park, and Havashaw. There are historic sites and museums such as Washington Irving's Sunnyside, Van Cortlandt Manor, Lyndhurst, the Old Dutch Church, the 1883 Lighthouse at Sleepy Hollow, and Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. The Hudson River Museum is located overlooking the river in Yonkers, and there are restaurants and lodgings as well. The Hudson River currently boasts an extensive range of tour boats that generally operate May through October. Many of these existing services have thematic tours of the Hudson River. There currently is boat service to many existing tourist destinations such as Yankee Stadium, Manhattan, West Point, Bear Mountain State Park, Hyde Park, Bannerman Island, and the Hudson River Maritime Museum. The existing boat service has tour packages to existing destinations. These destinations in Westchester are also proposed to be linked by Westchester's Riverwalk. Ossining has existing ferry service connecting the village to Haverstraw in Rockland County. Sing Sing can be accessed by ferry from Manhattan
the largest population center, in about 1.5 hours. Visitors can visit multiple sites using Metro-North Rail. The train station in Ossining is a short walk to the proposed museum. Currently, boaters can stay at local marinas. The next step is to get commitment from New York State to move forward with a project. Sing Sing is owned by New York State and operated by the Department of Corrections. The county has received a letter of support from the Department of Corrections with this project. It is also important to form federal, state, and county and local partnerships to fund the project and to form a foundation to raise funds for an endowment to secure the future of the museum. The operational model and management structure needs to be defined. Your support is critical to preserve the significant history of the historic 1825 cell block at Sing Sing. To find out ways you can help, please contact the Ossining Heritage Area Tourism Committee at 16 Croton Avenue, Ossining, New York 10562, or call area code 914-941-3554, or email at labels@villageofossining.org.